public guests. So why don't we just try to get going? You see Sarah's joined now. Katie, Wayne. Hi, Wayne. Hi, David. So why don't we get started? I guess it's a few minutes after 5. I'm sure we'll get some more folks trickling in. Welcome, everybody. This is the Citizens Advisory Committee on the Future of Lake Champlain. I'm Mark Nod, the chair. With us are a host of members. Remind everybody that we voted last meeting to record these, so they'll be recorded, but Katie and Lauren will also be taking minutes. Tonight, our agenda is a presentation from Ellen Keller, the Executive Director of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, and presenting the 2030 Farm to Plate Vermont Ag and Food System Strategic Plan, which is timely since we've been considering what is the future of ag, and she and her team, working with the ag agency, a number of staff there, have developed this plan. In addition, we thought we'd take a look at and get some feedback or comment on the governor's recent executive order on creating a new commission on the future of ag in Vermont. We don't have anyone from Agency of Commerce or Agency of Ag to present on that. It was fairly short notice. So we thought we'd hear from Ellen, maybe get a chance for someone from the agencies to update us on that new commission, the executive order, and how we might support that commission's work as this early implementation phase is underway. And then later on, we will talk about the final draft of the action plan, and then opportunities for members to participate in presentations to committees as soon as we can get them scheduled. So we can move on with that. One potential change in the agenda is, for those of you that weren't on, I asked whether Senator Lyons might give us a quick update on what's happening in the legislature and provide us any insights before she has to leave a little bit early. Other than that, any other proposed changes to the agenda from any members? We've got a number of public guests, and at this point, I guess if you use the raise hand function, if you're not on video and can't show us you raising your hand, if there's any public comments, now would be a good time for us to hear your voices. Okay, I don't see anyone wanting to add anything at this point. The first item on our agenda, at least this part of the agenda, is review and approval of the February 8th Vermont CAC meeting. Katie shared that with you all. And I guess initially I'd take a motion to accept them before we have any discussion or conversation. Thanks, Lori. Is there a second? Thanks, Wayne. Any discussion on the minutes? Okay. Hearing none, then all those in favor of accepting those minutes, and we'll place them on our website.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. So I guess we can move straight to you, Senator Lyons, if you wouldn't mind giving us a sense of what's happening in the legislature, certainly in the Senate side, and then I think Representative Odie Carroll is on, and perhaps she could follow up with anything from her perspective in the House.
Terrific. I'm glad to do it. Can you hear me? Oh, good. Okay. Hang on. I have these new little earbuds, and sometimes they fall out. So that one fell out. Now can you hear me? All right. So we'll just hope for no more technological glitches. So I'm going to start with the Act 250 bill that the Senate is working on, and that probably will not meet crossover, but there is still work ongoing with that. Most of the work that's ongoing in natural resources and energy has been on a new expanded weatherization program. So the Act 250 is sort of on hiatus, and legitimately, and also deliberatively to give more time for thought, given where we are in COVID. There is a bill that was passed out of Senate Agriculture and is now in Senate Education, and that bill relates to providing food and farm to plate linkages with schools, and so that all kids have all meals, all their breakfast and lunch at schools. I think maybe that'll come up in the later discussion. I don't know, but the Education Committee will be looking at that, and then it has implications for appropriations, so it has a bit of a ways to go, but I think that bill will make it over to the House. The bill that I'm most excited about, and it's the only other one that I'm going to talk about, I think, for now, is a bill, H89, an agritourism bill. It's actually a bill that I've worked on for the past 2 or 3 sessions that would provide some protection for agritourism in the state, and would so allow for essentially some signage where there are corn mazes or markets, and ignore my telephone, I apologize about that, where there are agritourism events, and would provide for some liability insurance that perhaps has been too expensive in the past. So this bill, as it came over from the House, received unanimous approval from those who are testifying. So that would include, I believe it also includes the Farm Bureau. It includes the Vermont Bar Association, which was the group that got in the way of the bill when it was in the Senate. So it's a terrific opportunity, I think, when for expanding economic opportunity for our agricultural sector. So that, I think that's honestly, I think that's it right now. Most of our attention has been on pandemic related issues, expanding voting opportunities, changing town meeting, and so on. So it's kind of a dearth unless Carol has something more to add.
Carol, do you have any updates for us from the House side on any active legislation that might be of interest or concern for us?
You're muted.
Oh.
Representative Odie, you're muted. You're still muted, Carol.
I was pulling up a sheet on my computer and then couldn't find the picture again. Okay, so let's see if I can tell you what's happening. Okay. In terms of other nice news in agriculture, there's a Vermont Agriculture and Food System Strategic Plan, and there is something called a big book, and it's made up of 54 product, market, and issue briefs, and it will be a go-to resource for the next decade. If you want to know what bottlenecks in hop production are, it's there. If you want to dig into food opportunities in major metropolitan market, it's there. And if you want to see what experts recommend for food security, farm succession, or racial equity, it's all there. Not to mention strategic goals, priority strategies, and credits for the 52 lead authors and 111 expert contributors. It's online at vtfarmtoplate.com/plan/. And water quality, H108 is clarifying a long-time interpretation and practice that Vermont's water quality standards apply to all surface waters, including rivers, lakes, ponds, and wetlands. And the bill also updates the state's Clean Water Act, Section 401 provision to help the state better manage large projects that may discharge to Vermont's surface waters, including projects subject to a federal permit or license, such as an interstate energy project. There's a huge focus on wildlands now, supporting and enhancing wildlands and intact forests. And the House Natural Resources Fish and Wildlife Committee is looking at how New Hampshire and Maine are supporting that. And I can tell you that I've been to a few national conferences by Zoom, and there's a huge focus on 30 by 30, protecting 30% of the land in our nation by 2030, and then 50-50, doing the same by 50-50. And then a bill that's moved out of House Natural Resources and into House Ways and Means is a new bottle bill. It's updated. It would charge 10 cents instead of 5 cents. It proposes to do that. And to expand the bottles that would be, the containers that would be covered to liquor and PET plastic for like Coke and water, and to glass. There are some issues, but the idea is the highest use of glass is to have a refillable bottle, and the next best is to have a recyclable glass because it can be used multiple times as long as it's clean enough. And right now, because of the way we collect glass, it gets mixed up with other items, and then it's hard to have it be clean enough. So those are some of the things happening in the House.
All right. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think, unless there's any questions from any members, I think I see Ellen has joined, and I think we can just move right into her presentation on the Farm to Plate Ag and Food System Strategic Plan that Carol was just mentioning. The plan was released, I think, about 10 days or so ago, maybe a little bit longer, and about the same time the governor's executive order. And given the work that we've been doing, I quickly reached out to Ellen to see if she might have the time, she or Jake, to let us know, tell us overview of how the plan was developed, perhaps some of the opportunities. I know she presented some testimony, perhaps part of the Farm to Plate bill that Senator Lyons discussed, and moving into education, continuing to expand the work that network has been engaged in over the last decade or more, and planning for this next decade. And then to consider how we might continue to participate within that Farm to Plate network and support it, particularly as the governor's executive order for a new commission on the future of Vermont agriculture is being formed. So, Ellen, if you're ready and available, I know we're a few minutes early, but
I'm here.
That gives us more time for conversation.
Absolutely. Happy to do that.
Welcome, Ellen, and thanks.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. I wish I knew who all of these, the one challenge I have with Teams is not knowing who all these different folks are, because I don't get to see everybody, but I guess I can scroll over and see names, so that's helpful.
Well, and I can just interject quickly that we have mostly members on. We have Senator Lyons and Representative Carol Odie, who are our two of our 4 legislative representatives, and also on our Bill Howland, past Basin Program, Lori Fisher, who you know from the Lake Champlain Committee, Eric Clifford, farmer. You certainly know Eric and his wife Jane.
Yep.
Wayne Elliott has been on the committee for a number of years, an engineer. Hillary Solomon is Poultney Medowee Natural Resource Conservation District. David Mears, and I think that's all of the membership that's there. We have a few guests that you can see: Cree Linalak, Ricky Lauren, Jeff Carter, and then staff.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, Mark, if that's okay.
Please do.
All right. Let's see here. Sorry. For some reason, I'm not. It's not coming up. Let's see. Why am I not? I'm not getting a screen share here. Oh, there it is. Application window. Sorry. All right. So again, can you see it now? Is everything? You're seeing my slide?
Looks great.
All right, and you're hearing me okay?
Yes.
All right. So thank you again. I'm really pleased to be able to present this plan to you all, and looking forward to having a conversation with you after I walk through this presentation briefly about, as Mark said, how we can collaborate with Vermont CAC going forward. So Eric Clifford was a member of the first Farm to Plate strategic plan process team way back in 2009 and 10. So great to have him on board watching this. Hopefully he'll see some new and improved from the first 10-year plan. And Jeff Carter, I understand, is on, and he is one of the contributing authors of the water quality brief that I'll touch on briefly. So great to have him on as well. So what I'm talking to Mark last Friday about how best to walk through this document. It is about 202 pages long, and hopefully folks have had a chance to either download it or skim it a little bit. I thought what I would do is hone in on a little bit of the history and the legislative outcomes that are guiding this plan's development and implementation. Talk a little bit with you about the stakeholder engagement process and what went into writing the plan, so that you can understand the grounding that it has. Then I'll go over some of the goals. Primarily, I'll focus on the environmental goals and objectives of interest that I think are of interest to you all. And then I'll focus in on a number of the priority strategies that will be of interest to you. And then some of the product, market, and issue briefs that I think will be of interest. And then we can talk a little bit about the connection to the Farm to Plate network and the restructuring that the network will be going through in order to align with the new priority strategies in the plan, and have plenty of time for Q&A. So that's where we're headed with my presentation. But first, I wanted to start with a land acknowledgement that we are on the land which has served as the site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous people for thousands of years, and is the home of the Western Abenaki people. The Farm to Plate Network honors, recognizes, and respects these people, especially the Abenaki, as the traditional stewards of the land and waters. In that spirit, we acknowledge that we are guests on this land. We need to respect and help protect the lands within our use. Those who will implement this strategic plan have a responsibility to help make this truth visible, to support efforts towards Indigenous sovereignty and well-being, and to dismantle the legacies of colonialism here in Vermont. So something that we spent a lot of time working with Chief Don Stevens to make sure we had this right and that we are committed to moving forward with continuing to acknowledge the Abenakis' presence and their history here. So a little bit of history about Farm to Plate. Hopefully you all know a little bit about it. In 2009, the state legislature requested that the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund implement what is officially called the Farm to Plate Investment Program. We call it Vermont Farm to Plate. And at that time, there were 3 legislative outcomes in the 2009 legislation, which were basically embodied in number 1 and number 3 on this slide, to increase sustainable economic development and create jobs in the farm and food sector, and to improve access to healthy local food for all Vermonters. And so we released the first plan in 2011, and as I mentioned, Eric Clifford was part of that initial team helping to put that plan together, along with about 1,500 Vermonters that we talked with over the course of an 18-month period. And then when we released that in January of 2011, with the then brand new Shumlin administration, we a few months later launched the Farm to Plate Network, which is a network of organizations who are working collaboratively to implement the plan. So we set to work and have been doing a lot of had a lot of good progress over the last 10 years. In 2019, we went back to the legislature and said, hey, we're getting close to the end of our 10-year cycle. Do you want to reauthorize Vermont Farm to Plate? And if you do, can we update the legislative outcomes? And so in 2019, that's exactly what the legislature did. They reauthorized Farm to Plate for another 10 years and tasked us with creating a new 10-year plan. And we suggested that the number 2 outcome of improving soils, water, and resiliency of the working landscape in the face of climate change be added to the enabling legislation as one of the 3 main outcomes. So, and we collapsed 2 of the outcomes into number 1. So we now have 3 legislative outcomes, which, if you know the official definition of sustainability, which is being economically successful, environmentally sound, and socially just, you know that that whole definition of sustainability is embedded in these 3 outcomes. So then within the plan itself, we have 4 goal categories, so to speak. 3 of them align directly with the 3 outcomes, so sustainable economic development, environmental sustainability, and healthy local food for all Vermonters. And then we've added an additional goal category around racial equity, with the increasing awareness of the importance of making our food system to be racially just and equitable. So we took 18 months to the strategic planning process. We started up in June of 2019. Over that course of that 18-month period, we had another 1,500 Vermonters that contributed in some way to the development of this plan. We actually got started even earlier by just asking certain key questions about creating a new vision statement, for instance, to the Farm to Plate Network at our gatherings and leadership retreats in preparation for doing this process. We had 52 lead authors and 111 contributors who came together to write 54 product, market, and issue briefs, which I'll talk a little bit more about. We did a public survey where we have 1,100 responses. And then towards the end of the process, after we created a lot of the briefs, we held 13 industry focus group sessions, including one with all the dairy watershed groups. We met with the beef producers. We met with farmers market managers and cheese producers, and a number of others, again, with the eye towards is what is showing up from in the product, market, and issue briefs of relevance to their domain. Was that feeling accurate? Like, how to, what were they thinking about the recommendations? How would they prioritize some of the recommendations based on their knowledge of things? We also created in this document is a vision statement for 2030. We have 15 goals this time around. We have 87 objectives to measure progress towards these goals, and I'll show you a little bit more about what those look like, but those are what we're going to be developing data visualizations around to help track progress over time. And then through all of this, we distilled down to 34 priority strategies that were distilled from 276 recommendations that were included in these 54 product market and issue briefs. So a lot of going from the top of the funnel of the vision statement down to goals and then to priority strategies. So this is another way to think about the plan and how it relates. If you think about a prism, the 3 legislative outcomes help to provide a guidepost, so to speak, for the plan's development. And then out of that plan itself includes the vision, goals, objectives, priority strategies, and then the product market and issue brief recommendations. And they all connect to one another across the entire document. So there are 15 strategic goals, as I mentioned, and up in the upper right-hand corner of each slide, I've indicated the PDF page numbers in case you want to follow along if you happen to have the whole document in front of you. But what I did was I'm taking out screenshots of components of the plan that I think are going to be of most interest to you all. And so I'll focus here on the environmental sustainability goals, of which there are 4 in the plan, and they all relate to different parts and pieces of what your strategic plan relates to in terms of water quality, soil health, preparing for climate change and adaptations, farmland stewardship, keeping sort of land use decision making, and promoting a strong and viable food system. So hopefully these goals will resonate with all of you, and you can see your work in all of this as well. To dive in a little deeper here in terms of then how we are thinking about the goals and the objectives that we created for each goal in the plan on these different pages across pages 14 to 26. What we've done is we've provided an example indicator for each of the goals, but the objectives are each of the objectives. So in goal 6, Vermont farm and food businesses will increase carbon sequestration, reduce food system related greenhouse gas emissions, and are able to adapt to climate change due to global warming, including floods, droughts, extreme storms, pests, and disease pressures. Then we've created 4 objectives, and with each one of these objectives, we will be developing a set of indicators to give us a sense of whether or not we're actually achieving the objectives towards achieving the goal, which ultimately leads back up to the second outcome of the legislation. So in this particular case, the 4 objectives for this particular goal relate to that we want to see increased amount of investment in climate-related research, adaptive practices, programs, and infrastructure. We want to see the total acreage in adaptive conservation practices increase by 35% over the next 10 years. We'd like to see aggregate greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture decreasing by 15%. And we'd like to see aggregate greenhouse gas emissions from non-farm food enterprises also decrease. So this example indicator here of Vermont farm acres under select conservation practices is one of the metrics that we will be keeping tabs on as we try to make sense of whether or not we're collectively achieving the objectives and the goals here. So I'll give you another example. In goal 7, Vermont farm stewardship is increasing ecological diversity, improving soil and water quality. Farm stewards are supported, compensated, and recognized for their positive contributions to the environment and public good. So in this case, you'll see a lot of the objectives, I think, line up very well with your strategic plan around meeting the TMDL goals, that river and stream miles impaired or altered by agriculture will decrease by 20%. Statewide soil health database and monitoring program will be established. At least 95% of Vermont's federal appropriation for EQIP and conservation stewardship will be obligated each year. The pounds of pesticides used per year will decrease by 20%. And you can see the rest here, establishing a payment for ecosystem services program. The percentage of Vermont residents reporting that agriculture has a positive impact on environmental quality will increase. So we'd like to, see that folks understanding more about where their food comes from, and that food is produced by farmers, and that farmers are doing their part to improve water quality and improve soil health, and that we have that sense together that that's happening. So those are some objectives related to Goal 7. And Goal 8, Vermont's agricultural land remains in productive agricultural use. Access to that land is more affordable and equitable. Land use planning decisions maintain and promote a strong and viable food system. And you can see there where there's a number of objectives, again, around being able to conserve more farmland. We think this is a really important objective to achieve, because good, viable farmland is a finite resource. Once it has a housing development on it, or a parking lot, or something like that, it is out of production forever. And so we would like to, and we know that there is a growing interest in more local food creation, generation, and especially coming out of COVID, we're seeing more and more Vermonters turning to local farms for their food source directly. So we really do believe that it's important that over the next 10 years, we really accelerate the rate at which we're conserving farmland for agricultural production, and in particular, using regenerative and sustainable production practices. Then with the more of the healthy food access for all Vermonters, Goal 13, I pulled this one out because I thought it also related a little bit to your goals and interests, which is that all people in Vermont can access the knowledge, skills, and resources to select, grow, hunt, fish, forage, process, store, and prepare local food. And in this particular one, the first objective, at least 90% of Vermonters will hunt, fish, forage, grow, or barter local food each year. Right now, the percent of Vermonters that acquire local food in 2019 from a Vermonter poll that we had from fishing is 37%. So we'd like to see more Vermonters interacting with the natural environment in terms of hunting and fishing and foraging and growing their own food, because that's another part of what it might be a small percentage of what they overall eat, but we'd like to see that level of engagement happening. And obviously, the work that you're doing in terms of water quality with Lake Champlain and the amount of boating and fishing and activities that happen on the lake is very much a part of what we're hoping to positively contribute to. So in terms of this plan and how where in other areas that might be of interest, as I mentioned, we had 54 product, market, and issue briefs that were developed by a number of authors and contributors. And the Sustainable Jobs Fund, we don't have the expertise in all of these topics. So we went out to folks that do have expertise, and we engaged them in writing these briefs. And I'll walk through it in a few minutes. What they look like if you haven't had a chance to take a look yet. But I put these blue arrows here for some of the briefs that I think may be of most of interest to the Vermont CAC, and you're welcome to take a look at them later. And in this particular case, there are 24 product briefs. So we did a deep dive into each of these types of products. So I think you'll maybe be interested in the agroforestry brief and the dairy brief, obviously, and the grass-fed beef brief, but there may be some other ones here also of interest to you. And some of the consistent themes that were really evident in each of the briefs is the need for additional business and technical assistance to producers, farmer-to-farmer peer education opportunities, improved product marketing, and further development of production standards. And I think all of those will resonate with you all as well. On the market brief side, there are 7 markets that we had briefs created around, and these are really, where do people go to actually acquire the food that they bring into their homes, whether that be at restaurants or grocery stores or direct markets such as CSAs or farmers markets or farm stands, for instance. And then on the issue brief side, again, areas where I think you might be of interest, we had 23 issue briefs areas around agritourism. So Senator Lyons talked about the agritourism bill that is likely to be passed this session. There is an agritourism task force that's been part of Farm to Plate since the beginning, and they've been very active in this space and trying to move this forward. And in fact, the limited liability insurance bill that Senator Lyons referenced is actually one of the recommendations in the agritourism brief. So if that passes this session, we'll be able to check that off the list, which is terrific. We also have an issue brief on alternative land ownership and access, climate change, farmland conservation, land use planning, payment for ecosystem services, succession on farms, supporting future farmers, water quality. All of those, I think, will be of great interest to you all and would encourage you to spend some time with them. So what do the briefs look like? They all follow a particular template that we created. We wanted to, and we called them briefs because they are in fact brief. Most of them are 2 pages long. Some are 4. The dairy brief is 8. And each of them follows this particular format. And if you only read one part of each brief and just read the green box that says what's at stake, you will have a good sense of what that brief is about. So that's even like the briefest of the briefs is to read the what's at stake. And then there's a brief synopsis of the current conditions related to that brief. And this one, I just happened to pull up the agroforestry brief. And then another part of each of the briefs is an area where we talk about bottlenecks and gaps, and we talk about opportunities. This one was pulled from the direct market brief, which is, CSAs and farm stands and farmers markets. And so there's a treatment of bottlenecks and gaps and opportunities identified. And then for each of the briefs, there are somewhere between 4 to 6 recommendations that relate. So this is coming out of the climate change brief. You can see things around funding a training program to be given to all agricultural service providers on the observed and projected changes in Vermont's climate, how it can affect agriculture and basic adaptation principles. What is learned in these trainings can then be shared with their farm clients. So we really asked the authors to give us a sense of, like, over the next 10 years, what are your recommendations for what we should be working on? What should we be prioritizing? So this is some recommendations for the climate change brief, just as a for instance. Here's 6 recommendations for the payment for ecosystem services brief. In this one, you'll notice that some of them have price tags connected to them. We pushed the authors and contributors as much as possible to be as specific as possible with their recommendation. So in some cases, they were able to do that, and they were able to quantify what the price tag would be. In some cases, they are one-time costs, and in other cases, they may be annual costs. So, for instance, expand the Vermont Environmental Stewardship Program to provide farmer participation stipends for benchmarking education. That would be an annual cost of $50,000 as a for instance. So that gives you a sense of that brief. And then the other part I wanted to show you coming out for the water quality brief was then at the very bottom of each of the briefs, it indicates who they were prepared by. So in this case, the lead author was Josh Faulkner at UVM Extension on the water quality brief itself. And then Marley Roop, Jill Arachi, Laura DePietro, Heather Darby, and Jeff Carter all were contributors to the water quality brief in this particular case. So each one of these briefs, you take a look at it, you look at the end of it, you can see who wrote it. You're welcome to contact any of them. We're hoping legislators, when they're looking at these, will then say, oh, these are folks that we could bring in to testify on this subject because they have some real subject matter expertise. So that's what basically each of the briefs looks like. Now I wanted to shift a little bit to the priority strategies, and I mentioned that there are 34 of them. And what I did was I pulled out those priority strategies that I think are going to be of interest to you all. And so in this particular case, there are 4 that relate to water, soil, and climate in some way, shape, or form. 25, perhaps a little less so, but it is talking about mapping the agricultural land base from a production capacity standpoint So that does relate a little bit, but not quite as much as 26, 27, and 28 do. So with 26, it's to better prepare for and respond to climate change related events, investigate innovative funding mechanisms for climate change adaptation practices, such as cover crops, building organic matter in the soil, crop insurance for diversified Vermont scale farms, emergency recovery following extreme water events. And then when you see those round circles with numbers in them, that relates back to the 15 goals. So in this case, priority strategy number 26 relates to goal number 3, which is an economic development goal, and then goals 6 and 7, which are the environmental goals, 2 of the environmental goals. And that way, through this color coding, we're hoping to help orient the reader to seeing how all these things interconnect. So number 27, continue to support the Payment for Ecosystem Services Working Group, which is poised to be a central point of coordination and connection for doing that work, and looking at least 3 ecosystem services to potentially fund results, outcomes-based work in, which is around water quality, flood resilience, and climate stability. And then fund scientific research into how various agricultural practices affect soil water quality and how the impacts of these practices can be measured and valued in a Payment for Ecosystem Services program once created. So again, you can see which goals these connect to. And then I wanted to point you also to the end of the document, pages 193 to 200. What we did was, the 34 priority strategies are really a distillation, as I mentioned, of the 276 recommendations across all of those different briefs that we published. So what we did was, we thought from a reader standpoint, we'd help out by creating this table at the end, which is a reference table. So for instance, with priority strategy number 26, we just talked about, of having better prepared for responding to climate-related events. You can see by what's on the right, then there were recommendations in the agroforestry brief, the bees and honey brief, the climate change brief, the maple brief, the Payment for Ecosystem Services brief, and water quality briefs, all which relate to those recommendations across all of those briefs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 briefs. There were recommendations that were distilled down to create priority strategy number 26. Okay. For priority strategy 27, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different briefs that had recommendations that relate to priority strategy number 27. And you can see then the same applies for priority strategy number 28, many different recommendations. So this was a way to just help orient, so that you're interested in a priority strategy and you're like, oh, where does that show up in the plan and across the different briefs? You can then go to those briefs that it relates to and read those individual briefs, and you can see in the recommendations how they show up. This priority strategy shows up. So what's going to happen next with all of this work is, as I mentioned at the start, we have a Farm-to-Plate network of many different groups that are aligned around the recommendations and strategies that came out of the first plan. Well, now we have the second plan, this new updated 2021 to 2030 Ag and Food System Strategic Plan. And so now we need to reorganize, realign, restructure the Farm-to-Plate network to have relevance and to align around the priority strategies in this new plan. And we're right now in the process of thinking through what that might look like. And this list is a possible list. It is by no means, please do not think that this is exactly how it's going to look, because we honestly do not know right now. But these are some possible areas where we might focus our attention based on the priority strategies and the recommendations and the work, the bottlenecks and gaps and the opportunities expressed in these 54 different briefs. So we're thinking, though, that there will be some group that forms around climate, soil, and the environment, some group that will form likely around land access, conservation, ownership, and you can read down and see that list there. So where I think we could have our conversation go is thinking about, based on your strategic plan, and where you all are headed and what you're all are focusing on, both the CAC, but also the Lake Champlain Basin Program in general. Where are there some points of connectivity? Where are there some synergies between your network of organizations that are working on specifically on water quality and soil and ag practices related to water and the lake, and where this larger food system network of 300 plus organizations are looking at the entire food system, of which obviously clean water, healthy soils, and a good clean environment are a major component of what makes for healthy local food. So I think we can explore that and think about where our network of organizations can, some of those members can amplify what you all are working on, and where you can amplify some of what we're working on synergistically for the greater good. And so I think that's really where we can focus our conversation here, is where you might be able to focus, which of these focus areas are possible intersections between the Vermont CAC and this strategic plan. So that's the presentation, and I want to thank you for the opportunity, and we'll move into whatever your questions. And Mark, we can go into whatever you want to else you want to talk about in terms of opportunities to engage with each other.
Thank you, Ellen. Really impressive plan and impressive amount of work and presentation with how I found it. While it's a huge document, I could look into the things I wanted to focus on and see how they're interrelated and connected and what the opportunities might be. So I guess we'll start with any questions any of the members might have. And I think if we just use a chat and raise hand system to get started, and then we'll move to any public questions. So do any members want to start with any questions or? Sorry, let me get my screen here so I can see everybody. David.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Ellen, that was fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to really thoughtfully go through and parse what I know is a really gargantuan piece of work in so many ways, both in terms of volume and then just the kind of the quality of the underlying work. So thank you for doing that. That was a gift to us.
You're welcome.
I'm still going through it, and I think there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge embedded in the recommendations and the issue briefs, as you said. One observation based on kind of my first review and your summary is that a lot of the recommendations as they relate to the clean water, watershed health, soil and health kinds of categories still are still pretty heavily dependent on doing more information gathering, more study, more assessment and analysis. And I know that the Vermont public is eager to see, some stronger, more forceful actions and changes in the way that our farming practices are occurring. Some of that I think is occurring and it's not seen. That's been a conversation that's come up with this group a fair amount. And at the same time, I also think there's some transformations happening driven by the farm economy, particularly as it impacts the global farm economy and national dynamics as they affect dairy. And there's changes that are just happening. Some negative, some not so, some may be positive in the long run. It's hard to know. But I'm wondering if there are, if there's ways that we can go into this brief, the work of the Farm to Plate, and look beyond kind of the very specific to water quality recommendations and ask, is there learning we can get from some of the higher level economic transformations that are happening to see whether there's ways for us to reach beyond our traditional approach, which has been to talk about, we want we want this agency to enforce this rule, or we want more of this kind of rule and less of that kind of rule, or we want, more public funding, to some broader questions about whether or not we need to support a larger kind of set of efforts at the Vermont legislature and state government that relate to what's the future of farming. Like, are there ways in which Vermont should be creating new systems to support farmers as they transition to new and different kinds and more economically positive forms of farming that may also have environmental benefits? Sorry, that was very long-winded, but.
No, it's an excellent question. And so yes, if I had shared with you some of the economic goals and economic goal objectives, I think you would see that a bit more in terms of what our treatment has been of that. I mean, when we were tasked by the legislature to create this plan, they didn't say to us, you need to only look at organic, diversified, small-scale farms. They said, look at the whole food system, right? Which includes conventional, organic, grass-based. It includes farms, processing, food manufacturers, distributors, retail outlets. They asked us to do a full treatment. So if you read the entirety of the plan, I think you will get a sense of the larger direction overall that we're sensing is in the works. So as you said, there's a lot that's in motion right now, and even more so because of COVID, right? We're seeing from COVID finally the realization that the concentration in production, processing, and distribution that's been happening across this country for the last 50 years has made our food system very brittle and vulnerable to major shocks like pandemics, like climate events. So there is a growing awareness that we need to be thinking more about a diversity of approaches, a diversity of practices, and a diversity of products, and to be able to think in terms of how do we not be so concentrated on any one product or any one market so that we're vulnerable when these shocks happen. So if you take a look at some of other aspects of the plan, you'll see that, for instance, in some of the economic development goals, there are objectives related to expanding the percentage of other products that we're producing here in Vermont, which as a way of strengthening, for instance, grass-fed livestock, strengthening value-added products, because the markets are changing, consumer demands continue to change, and it has an impact on then also what can our land best be suited for. And then I'll also say that part of what's in the plan is a lot around farmland succession, supporting future farmers, and a lot of that has to do with who is the next generation of farmers and what do they want to do? How many of them might want to stay in dairy? How many of them are going to want to transition into some other forms of agriculture or value-added food production, for instance? And how do we support all of that as we go forward as well? Because as you say, everything's changing so quickly. And our hope is that the way in which we approached the writing of these briefs was in essence to try to capture, look behind us, like what has transpired, but then looking forward, what are the trends suggesting? And how do we position Vermont to be an even stronger producer and marketplace for a more diversified and sustainable, and in some cases, regenerative food system?
Thanks. That's very helpful.
Yeah. We're looking forward, like what do we really want the food system to be in 2030? And if you read the vision statement, I think you'll get a sense of really directionally what people are saying that where we want to head. And I will say that's also reflective in what we're seeing in the other 5 New England states. And I'm very active with the other 5 New England states in thinking about how we're standing up a new program called New England Feeding New England. And it's about how do we increase regional food production for regional consumption. So not just in Vermont, but across the entire 6-state New England region. And we'll let New York come in, here and there, every once in a while.
I've got a screen freeze. Can everybody hear me? Any other members? Additional questions for Ellen? Ellen, I had a question, and it's I understand it's premature, but obviously the timing of the report and the governor's executive order are there's a connection there, and I'm wondering if you have a sense of, as this work in progress continues to evolve and some of the specific recommendations get more structured to specific asks to the legislature, et cetera, for programmatic investment funding, whether it's as part of COVID or beyond COVID response and beyond. How do you see these next steps of implementing the plan, and how the plan might inform the work of the this new commission?
Sure. Yeah, good question. And let me start by saying one thing I forgot to mention was the process of developing this plan this time around was very much accomplished because of our working partnership with the Agency of Agriculture. They were very much a part of this whole process. They reviewed all of the briefs and all of the recommendations and added a lot of substantive improvements to the documents that were authored. Some of their staff actually were the lead authors on a couple of the briefs, but all of the briefs were reviewed by whatever agency staff had particular expertise to offer. So they were really strengthened. And I think that the reason for the Governor's Commission really grew out of a desire that Anson Tebbetts, Secretary Tebbetts, and the governor had around looking for additional prioritization and of recommendations for moving forward, especially because there have been so many documents, different planning processes that have happened over the last couple of years. So you think about, I'm not sure if members are aware, there was a white paper of a sort that then Chuck Ross, when he was at Extension, and Ella Chapin and myself and Nick Richardson from the Land Trust and Paul Costello and a few others crafted, called the future of Vermont agriculture. And it was really trying to highlight this, or to raise a sense of urgency that because of these issues around farmland succession and the number of farm families that don't yet have a succession plan or somebody identified as the next generation, that a lot of our farmland was going to be at risk of coming out of agricultural production if we didn't act quickly. So that raised an urgency kind of flag in the fall of 2018. And then you may recall Roger Albee and Gil Livingston initiated the process around dairy and water quality collaborative, and they came out with 8 or 9 recommendations in the spring of, I think it was 2019 that they came out with their recommendations. And then there was the legislature established another milk commission, and that came out with their recommendations about a year ago. And there was the agency got some funding to do a dairy market assessment to look at trends in the dairy industry, for instance, that came out a year ago. There was a Northeast Dairy Summit that happened up at Jay Peak 2 years ago, and there were recommendations that came out. And then our plan came out. So there was this sense of the Payment for Ecosystems Working Group, their report. So it was a sense that there was a lot of reports with many good recommendations. Many of the recommendations are in alignment or are synergistic or support one another. But ultimately, you have a lot of recommendations. How do you prioritize that? And of those recommendations, what makes most sense for legislative and administration action on? What are the regulatory levers that need to be improved upon? For instance, what level of funding for certain types of programs might be needed? So how do you go about prioritizing that across multiple plans that have come out? So so I think the intention here in creating the Governor's Commission was to have a group of people who could help synthesize and come up with a set of recommendations that the governor could explore to take action on, and have it delivered in a time frame so that it could be part of the legislative, the administration's development of their budget, their annual budget cycle, as well as getting prepared for the next legislative session that could go into the governor's state of the state or to his budget address. So that there was this, the time frame was, instead of a report coming out in January, the report is being asked for in November so that it can actually inform the governor's recommended actions. It's not, of course, with any governor's commission, there's no guarantee that he's going to take those recommendations. But I think what it does provide is an opportunity for a smaller subset of folks with some expertise to take all of these different recommendations and serve up to the governor for his consideration what to focus on in the coming year and what to prioritize from a funding perspective. That being said, I fully anticipate that the Farm to Plate network, as we restructure it, there will be opportunities where various groups in the network will, because of their own work, have some recommendations for action, whether that be funding or programs or policy changes, that they can then give to the Governor's Commission for their consideration. So there'll be an opportunity for a lot of interplay, back and forth, collaboration, so to speak, where the network organizations, and the same will apply to the Vermont CAC. You know, as you guys develop your recommendations, that you'll have a place to give them those recommendations for the Governor's Commission to consider. Is this the set we want to advance to the governor this coming year, as a for instance? So that's my understanding anyways. Again, I wasn't part of that whole process, so this is just what I've been able to cobble together and understanding where this is coming from and what the opportunity is. But I think it does represent an opportunity, and that we can all work together to try to advance, you know, some number every year of what our priorities are. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, thank you.
But very much in development.
Understood. It's this evolving process, and I think particularly as both you and David mentioned, there's a lot of things at play that COVID has spotlighted, and how our behaviors around food and purchasing and outdoor recreation, buying local healthy food is changing what's been happening on the ground here in Vermont and maybe regionally, and we're still learning about that. So, Ellen, I shared with you the draft of our action plan that we're reviewing tonight. That's print ready, save for any last minute minor modifications. And I wondered if you had a chance to look at it, and then if you saw within the context of our action plan, were there components of the strategic plan that you thought were a recommendation that we might highlight or consider, that as we're presenting the plan, we might note while we're having the opportunity to be in front of the various legislative committees? And I just thought it is a chance for you to maybe spotlight for us, based on your awareness of our work and our efforts, opportunities for us to have a shared voice with you on some of these items.
Yeah. Sure. I didn't get into too deep into reading it, but I did scan it. I would say for sure the investment in natural and developed infrastructure, in particular, talking about technical assistance to communities. And if farmers are included in that communities, I would, but other types of food related businesses as well, that would be a terrific way to intersect. One of the things, I didn't mention this, but across the 276 recommendations, there were 33 new full-time equivalent technical and business assistance providers that the contributing authors and lead authors felt were needed, meaning we don't have enough boots on the ground of technical and business assistance providers. Like, people like Jeff Carter are amazing, and there's so many great people at Extension, and many of them are soft funded by grants, and there's not enough of them given the need, given the level of need. I mean, we know through this process that there's at least, another 6 full-time FTEs just to work on succession planning with farms that could be, that are needed. So anything that you guys can say that amplifies the need for that kind of technical assistance, in whether it's, obviously in this particular case, you might be talking about urban and rural infrastructure for water quality improvements, but to the extent to which that also connects with soil and practices, with farming practices, soil health initiatives, all of that, sensor technology, those kinds of things would be terrific to amplify. And then on your second page, I think the investment in agricultural transition to sustainability absolutely connects. We have there's alternative models, not only of agriculture, but alternative models of ownership that we explore in the plan. And this one in particular really does touch on the need for technical expertise for transitions. So as we start to see more of, we are going to continue to see, we anticipate continuing to see a number of dairy farms wanting to transition either out of dairy because it's just not financially feasible to keep going, or they don't have the next generation coming along that wants to stay in dairy, or they're looking to, for instance, as the Jones brothers did, to get out of dairy and move it into goat raising of goat's milk and selling to Vermont Creamery. That there's lots of these, there's just so much that's happening right now. And so do we have enough people to help farmers and food entrepreneurs in this space to adapt to the changing marketplace and make the transitions as they want to make them? And I think that's probably, those two in particular align well with what's in the plan. And there's probably, parts of other ones that are too, but those two in particular, I think, and especially the investment in ag transition to sustainability, very much aligns with a lot of the recommendations that are in the plan.
Thank you. I think that we'll be trying to schedule meetings in the very near future. And so if you have any other thoughts, feel free to share them as you respond, or perhaps others might follow up with you. We'll have the plan shared and available with everybody else. In the meantime, Carol Odie, Carol, do you have a question, comment?
No, I don't. I was going to say, for the succession planning and for some of the other things, I'm wondering if you could partner with the Vermont Bar Association, see if you can get some retired lawyers to do some work pro bono or.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I don't, my organization, the Sustainable Jobs Fund, we don't get involved in that level of detail. However, I can definitely, pass that suggestion along to like the Vermont Land Trust and Vermont Housing Conservation Board and the Farm and Forest Viability Program, and Land for Good. Those are and UVM Extension to a certain extent. Those are the folks that are really the ones that are doing the actual deep succession planning work with a number of farms. And I do know that there are not enough lawyers that have experience in understanding the complexities of transitioning working farms to the next generation. We have heard that there's because there's such a need right now, there's like hundreds of farms that need to go through this process right now, that there's just not enough lawyers with that expertise and knowledge. But your suggestion of at least talking to the Bar Association, seeing if there's some retired lawyers is a good one, and I can pass that along.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Ellen, thanks again for remarkable effort, you and your colleagues. Thanks for taking the time to share that with us. try to digest and share with us what you thought was sort of within our bailiwick as we're doing our work, and we started this conversation around what is the future of ag, and particularly how does it impact water quality and our opportunities and obligations to meet TMDL requirements and other issues. So thanks again for willing to, on short notice, make a presentation. I'm sorry, Ricky, did you have a question?
Yeah, we in New York, we appreciate you thinking of us once in a while, Ellen. And we know that everything gets sucked downstate, okay? But for us up here, we're on the same pages with you guys. And one of my questions was, the succession is a great thing for all the farmers. I wish it had come around much, much sooner. But what about the wind farms and solar? Is that taking away farmland in Vermont like it is here?
That's a good question. Not wind. Actually, there's a couple of farms that actually have like 100 kW type wind turbines on their farms. Like I'm thinking of Blue Spruce Farm in Bridport, for instance. They not only have a digester, but they have solar and they also arrays, and they also have a wind turbine that's providing electricity for their farm operation. So I think done right, it can be very beneficial. We haven't had quite as much pressure on farmland with solar, to my knowledge, and I could be wrong about this, as we did, say, 5 years ago. And there was a solar siting commission that the legislature created to do a study on looking at this question of like, where is the best place to site solar arrays, because of the fact that there was this feeling like a lot of them were showing up on what were farm fields that, or rather on fields that could be put to other kinds of agricultural use, but maybe they had just been fields for a really long time, for instance. And because they're flat, they're easy to get to. They were sort of prime targets for solar developers. I do think, though, that since that time, there's been a growing awareness of the ways in which you can do solar that can be complementary. So if you put them up higher, for instance, and you have sheep grazing underneath, and you have wildflowers that are for bees and pollinators, you can actually have some pretty amazing win-win-wins, both for the farmer, but also electricity generation and wildlife, in the case of bees, if it's done correctly. So I think that's the key here, is that as our awareness of these technologies grows, how can we have renewable energy generation happening on farms, but in a way that doesn't detract from our ability to then grow food for ourselves going forward? How many barn roofs need to get strengthened so that they could support a solar array on their roof, as for instance? How are there areas of on any particular farm where you could put a solar array because they're just too wet, for instance, and you just can't be driving tractors in them? But you can put a 25-year solar array and still have wetland functions happening just fine. So those kinds of things are things that I think are more in play now in Vermont. I don't know what's happening in your part of New York, but that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, there's a farm that gave up about 200 acres, and it's all nice workable land to solar farms. And I'm just wondering, maybe we need to address that a little more here.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this is education, and a lot of it is thinking about, for instance, one of the ideas that had come up many years ago that I don't think really has played itself out is, for instance, as we think about creating a larger buffer strips on farm fields between, with as buffers with rivers and streams, for instance, could you put solar arrays in those buffer strips so that even though the farmer's now losing the amount of the cost that they would have to buy more corn and hay or whatever was going on in that property that now had to come out of production because of buffer strips, could you replace some of that lost that expense or that cost with having solar arrays in those areas and gain back some income because you have solar panels or solar arrays going on in those areas that you can no longer put row crops in, for instance, or the hay, for instance. So those are the kind of creative things I think we all need to be thinking about, because it's not an either or, it's really a both and that we need to be moving forward on.
Thank you very much. A great presentation too tonight.
Thank you. Happy to do that. So Mark, I definitely think that, you know, the key here is, as you guys think about how you want to move forward with your strategic plan, as we start thinking about how the network gets reshaped, let's be in touch and see where there might be some opportunities to collaborate and with the network group that works on these issues that are closest aligned with your strategic plan and how to engage with you. We will.
So thanks again, Ellen. Very much appreciated. It's a terrific presentation and a great piece of work. And I'm sure will be parts of our continuing conversations. We'll be in touch.
Yeah.
And best of luck as you socialize it in the legislature, and we'll do what we can to support that.
All right, great. Thanks so much. We'll be in touch.
Thanks,
Bye,
Ellen.
everybody. Good night.
That was terrific, and is a great segue for us into taking a look at our action plan. So Lauren and Katie and Elizabeth Lee at the Basin Program helped put together this final draft, and in a print-ready version. It was shared with you, I think, on Wednesday. I know we had a comment from Hillary regarding, I think, two aspects of it that I thought we might be able to discuss and address before looking for final approval to send to print and make it digitally available. The other thing I'd want to be sure we accomplish is an opportunity to talk about folks' availability for presentation to the various committees, and we'll start trying to schedule that. So I wanted to be sure that we had a handful of other members and their opportunity to join in as they might be available. We're not sure what those times might be, but we're going to try and target a time. Senator Lyons, can you remind me when crossover? What's crossover date?
Crossover date is this Friday, which is what, the 12th?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So that means bills from policy committees go to the Senate floor, or they may go to Finance Committee or Appropriations.
Right.
Those two committees have an additional week to finalize the revenue or the appropriations.
Okay. So it's likely that our first opportunity will be to maybe have some presentation during that week, or it'd be the week immediately after. So I would think the earliest we'd get in front of any committees is a week or so from now, probably 2 weeks. So for our purposes then, I just want folks to be able to think about what their availability might be the week of the 22nd to the 26th. And I think just generally we'll start with that week as our first best options, and we'll work with Sarah Coleman and Emily Bird to work with the various committee leaders to see if we can slot us in based on their other work. And I guess we can leave that for others to be able to, or for another time, to be responsive on when you might be available and your willingness to participate in those meetings. Senator Lyons?
Well, I was just thinking that, yeah, probably that week that you mentioned is the best week. There's no way you can coordinate it all earlier than that. sometimes after crossover, there's a little bit of a downtime when people are just picking up issues and ideas, but not having testimony on specific bills. So the sooner you make contact, probably the better.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we'll start making contact, right away. And, historically, I think our biggest struggle is trying to get all of our meetings together on the same day. And that's not necessary under these circumstances. And so we might be able to do it over, 2 or 3 days. And that gives us a lot more flexibility for all of the various members and to slot ourselves in with the committee. So we'll get to work on that certainly in the next 24, 48 hours. And then see what's available and see who can step in and be part of the conversation and presentations. All right, so let's see. Katie, can you pull up the first page of our action plan?
Yes. Mark, did you want to talk about members that are interested in presenting to the legislature, just so that we have a sense of that as we work on scheduling the next couple days?
Yeah, I think we can just have folks, unless people want to do it right now, I think if anyone who's got some availability, they could just email myself and Katie after the meeting tomorrow about their availability. And I think, as we noted, the soonest would likely be the 15th to the 19th, but more likely the week of the 22nd to the 26th. So I think if some folks could just email us and let us know their interest and general dates of availability. And of course, we'll be following up and try to coordinate who on what days and in front of which committee. Does that make sense to everybody? Wayne, did you have a comment?
Yeah, Mark, what do you think in the format with the virtual? Is that just just trying to get a couple committee members? I mean, a couple of our committee members to present to each committee. It doesn't really make sense to have 4 or 5 people in a virtual format, probably.
Yeah,
in the presentation.
I agree. I think that a few people to do the presentation and anyone else that might be able to log in during that time for sort of strength in numbers, that'd be terrific. If they happen to have that 20-minute window or half-hour window to be able to be engaged and be available. I think it's always better the more of our membership we have sort of present and part of it, and whoever is presenting can introduce that they have other members over their shoulder as they're making the presentation. I think that's worked in the past in person and will be effective again in these Zoom or team presentations.
And I assume we're going to send these out in PDF to all the committees kind of ahead of time, so they've got it marked.
Yeah, I think PDF and or print. I think we talked about printing about 30% of what we printed in the past. I think if we printed 600, we're only going to print 200 or 250, depending on what minimum print runs are. I think having them available for the Basin program and others has been helpful. And certainly there's a lot of people that like to have that piece of paper. So I think so many folks are used to digital sharing now that I don't think we need to do the full print run boxes that we've done in the past.
Okay.
I can give a quick update. There's no minimum print quantity. It doesn't affect the pricing. So we should just choose a quantity that makes sense given distribution.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. All right, so I'd like to move into it and give an opportunity. Hillary shared with all of us comments on the both the enforcement section, the ag enforcement section, and then also a comment on next generation toxins. And so I think if we, other than that, I didn't hear any other comments regarding the layout, the images, or anything else. So now is our opportunity. Typically, we're approving and have already fixed language, but I want to provide the opportunity for Hillary to have a discussion on her 2 comments and present that, and then move on with any other sort of graphic and design comments, and then final approval. So, Hillary, I don't know if you want to share your comments and begin that discussion.
Sure. My first one was maybe just kind of making sure we had some fact checking on the quality control issues with the herbicide, pesticide. You know, it talks about suffered from quality control problems, and I just wanted to make sure that was coming from, you know, somewhere that we could cite, just because I know those are really, really difficult compounds to analyze in the lab, and I didn't want to imply that it was some fault of the lab itself, unless that was the case.
Could you scroll down 1 page, go to the back page?
It's like the second to last sentence.
Right. So my understanding, based on what we heard, that it was less about laboratory quality control and it was about data acquisition and data management. And that led to Lori's request and resolution to ask the Basin Program Steering Committee to increase opportunities for additional collection and analysis and monitoring within either an existing long-term monitoring program or some other parallel program that was effective. I presented that to the steering committee at the most recent meeting. It was, I think, well received. They asked that we visit it with the technical advisory committee to get into a little more deeply into the logistics, some of the budget issues that might arise, and flesh that out a little bit more. So that's what we'll be working on as we approach the next steering committee meeting, which is in April. And I think we have an opportunity to have a conversation with TAC at their meeting in a few weeks. Oh, Nat, did you have a comment on quality control issues?
Hi, yeah, just a quick one on that sentence. I think you're right that you don't want to be saying that it's an issue with the monitoring of the use of agricultural chemicals. It's a question of the pesticide sales and use database, not the monitoring the effects of the pesticides in the environment, which is what it sort of is implying, but that the database of what pesticides are actually being applied in the state are what the agency has said is had quality control issues.
So it's the data gathering aspect more than the actual monitoring, or I guess in other words, you're suggesting that this statement
It's a database.
on
Sorry, go on.
health impacts of use rather than improvements in data gathering and data sharing and the quality control of the database.
It's a database management issue that they've admitted they have a quality control problem with, that they're required to collect reports from every commercial pesticide user in the state on what they're actually applying, and that database has been not adequately maintained. Does that make sense?
I think so. So that the statement, if it said historically, the state's monitoring data on the use of agricultural chemicals and other contaminants has been been minimal, has suffered from quality control problems, and much of it is unusable. Would that be a more accurate statement?
I guess what bothers me is the monitoring word, because to me anyways, that means you're monitoring pesticides in the environment, which isn't what the issue is that has quality control problems.
Okay.
Collecting information maybe, or?
Pardon, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, no, that was, I agree too. The word monitoring made me think we were talking about water samples. But the state's collecting information or managing information maybe instead of data also, because data also makes me think of water samples, especially when it's used next to monitoring.
All right. Let me think about it for a minute and I'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Can somebody just enlarge the text here so we can view it? It'll be easier to read and maybe wordsmith it. Thank you.
Is that readable? Bill?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Bill, you had a comment?
Yes, I do. And while I do appreciate the kind of data capture that Nat has described, absolutely want to be clear that I would like that monitoring to be including in the environmental water quality monitoring that the basic program supports, wherever it comes from agriculture or from backyard lawns or from a truck wreck on the highway that's had a spill. I care where it comes from, but in this case, my priority and the reason I pushed for this to be included, and the place I think we need to go is that we need to do the environmental monitoring to show us what atrazine, glyphosate, and perhaps other compounds are in the water that we've sampled. And so absolutely empirical evidence is what we're looking for. In addition to whatever else the agricultural agency monitor. I just don't want to make it seem like we're not after capture by long-term monitoring efforts or other efforts to monitor, because that's what I want to see.
Okay, Senator Lyons?
So I'm hearing a lot of different things about the word monitoring here. So is the goal in this sentence to measure, or is the goal to regulate? Are we talking about regulation in the past? That's what's unclear. I mean, monitoring is one thing, collecting samples and measuring and gathering data to have some kind of a registry, or is it rather to regulate the use? And I can't see it right now because everything's in the way, so I don't, there it goes. Yes, so let me just ask that question. What is the meaning of the sentence?
This is Bill, if I can be permitted to just add in answer. We didn't take any kind of position to say that these pesticides, herbicides must face new regulations or new limits. The problem that we have is that we need to know where they are and how much there is. And when we are so informed, that information might drive a decision to not limit anymore or to limit. But we're uninformed right now. So this is monitoring to make sure that we become informed about the presence and quantities and spatial distribution of these compounds in our waters.
Wayne, did you have a comment?
Yeah, Mark, I just put this out there for the wordsmithing. I mean, if we change this to say historically the state's database documenting the use of agricultural chemicals and other contaminants has been minimal suffered, does that kind of clarify the intent of here and then take out the gray kind of monitoring portion of it and just be a little bit more concise?
Yeah, I think, I think that my sense was that this statement was twofold, like Bill was suggesting. One, and it led to Lori's request and resolution to increase monitoring in some way under existing programs, opportunities to take and samples and have them evaluated and analyzed for pesticides and herbicides and other pollutants, in conjunction with perhaps other data and analyses that are part of the regular routine long-term monitoring program or some other. And then second was a statement that we heard, and I believe Carrie wholeheartedly agreed, that the database suffered miserably over the last year. So I think perhaps we ended up trying to make both of those statements with this one sentence. In other places, our second must, we said initiate robust improvements in collecting, analyzing, monitoring data with rigorous quality assurance control and transparent public reporting. I mean, that was our shall statement, and this is just some of the supporting. So I see how monitoring might trip up and make the focus strictly about the data sampling rather than the database issues that that Nat highlighted for us, and Nat received some pushback after his presentation from some folks. So, Nat, did you have another comment? Did you have a clarification on this?
Sure. Just, yeah, like you're saying, it looks like you're trying to say two different things in these two sentences that are highlighted right now. And the first one, I think you might say something more like, historically, record keeping of pesticides actually used in Vermont has been inadequate and suffered from quality control problems, and much of it is unusable. That gets to the database question. And then the second sentence could be something like, reduction of toxic substances use are essential, et cetera, et cetera. So increased monitoring of environmental monitoring of these compounds is imperative, or something like that.
Okay. Do we want to try to wordsmith this right now and solve for these two sentences? We need to tweak it because we're close to our limits of space. Our this action plan was a few hundred words longer than our last one, and Elizabeth did a great job fitting it all in, creating the highlights, and still getting in some good images, and I think a nice presentation. So we have the recording and the minutes. Do we want to try to make those adjustments right now, or do we want to take the statements and we'll develop a final one for final approval and share it electronically? David?
Yeah, I would vote for the latter, that we not spend any more time on this. I've got a hard stop at 7, and we haven't addressed really a much more substantial comment that Hillary made. That would require, pretty significant change. So I recommend that whoever's willing wordsmith that section, and that we turn quickly to the issue of water quality enforcement.
Any objections to that?
No.
Okay, great. Let's move on then. Hillary's other, and Katie, if you could go to the first page, or wait, where are we? No, we're sorry. I'm sorry. It's just above where you were, the consolidation of water quality enforcement. Hillary, do you want to frame your comment?
Sure. Yeah, I feel like when I first started working in Vermont, I think I would have agreed with this. But having worked extensively with both DEC and Agency of Ag, I'm not sure that this is actually something that would be helpful. So I guess I'm not sure if everybody else thinks this is something that would be beneficial to water quality. I see a lot of technical support being given to farmers by the Agency of Ag, and I see a lot of feeding of sort of farms with water quality issues into their granting programs. I think there's still sort of this need for Agency of Ag to have on-site, field staff. They work with a lot of funds, and they help implement a lot of programs on farms. So I think that once something's gone to enforcement at DEC, that technical assistance isn't available. It's a very legal process. And so I'm working with a farm right now that's basically in crisis, and the response we get from DEC is like, put it in writing, tell us what you're going to do. But they can't, I think legally they can't give any sort of recommendations or provide technical assistance. And so it's been a really difficult process. And I'm pretty sure this farm will go out of business. So I think that, I guess I just would rather see certainly, gross violations, of course, should go to DEC and should go through this type of enforcement. And but to have all water quality regulations, residing within DEC, I guess that would mean the RAPs, that would mean anything legal. And I don't think that would be beneficial in the long run.
David, and then Lori.
Yeah, thanks, Hillary, for the comment, because you make a great point. Speaking just for myself, I'm not sure what's motivated the other members to support this, but for my own part, what I've seen is that there is a failure of the enforcement program of the state of Vermont, without pinning it on Agency of Ag or DEC. The two agencies have failed to coordinate effectively under the MOU, and the farmers are suffering, and the environment is suffering, and the enforcement programs are supposed to provide prompt, clear, and transparent outcomes, that are clear to the regulated community and the public. They're supposed to be transparent and relatively swift as they, as can be. There's a complete breakdown between the two agencies in terms of their collaboration on enforcement, and the farmers are caught in the middle. So with that said, I'm willing to consider other language for this, because I feel like for an issue this controversial, it would be better for the Lake Champlain Citizens Advisory Committee to be in consensus on this, if possible. And if it made a statement that our water quality enforcement program for agriculture is failing, and the MOU is not an effective method for allocating responsibility, and the legislature needs to make a decision about fixing that somehow. I'm not sure what the right language would be. I would be okay with that, but I do think we should have something in here that reflects the fact that the system is failing. And there's nothing necessarily that requires that prevents technical assistance to an entity that's in enforcement. That's a policy decision that the Department of Environmental Conservation has made. So there's ways to sort through this, but what we can't tolerate, I think, as a public or as a farm community, is to have the level of dysfunction that we're currently seeing.
Lori? Oh, you're
sorry.
muted.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I agree. And I do want to note, just in terms of process here, I know it's been a really busy time and a challenging time for everybody, but this is something that's been in various stages in early drafts, and it was, in the revision that was sent out that Bill and I worked on January 29th. I am a little worried. I want to be sensitive to the concerns raised, but I think this very much came out of the fact of the lack of effectiveness in the process that we have, which has been ineffective for a long time. And as David said, yes, absolutely, the farmers are caught in the middle. And I really feel like we've got to resolve this swiftly in terms of our language, because we're going to be presenting an action plan when it's very late in the legislative session. If we don't do that, I'm sensitive to the concerns, but also it's not new information in the action plan.
Carol?
And I recognize that, Lori, and I apologize. I was supposed to talk about this at the last meeting and I ended up with a conflict that night. So I completely understand that this is coming in late.
Carol?
Yes, I think being very clear with exactly what was said, what we think has gone wrong, and what we think that we're asking it to be fixed, and suggestion for how it can be fixed is really important. So I think we've been really clear. Otherwise, it'll be lost.
And Jeff?
Would there be a problem if we added something to the effect that, while VTAAFM continues to provide technical assistance where appropriate, or something like that? If the concern is that once you go to enforcement with DEC, all other assistance stops, I can certainly see that in certain situations that might not be the best way to solve the problem. In other situations, it might be. So I don't understand, and I don't want to get into a discussion. We don't have time about what the legal complications are, but if you could just add as an advisory thing, if folks would agree to it, that technical assistance could continue where appropriate, even when a situation is referred or taken over by DEC for enforcement. Perhaps that would solve the problem or make it better, Hillary. I'm just suggesting.
And Eric Clifford, did you have a comment? I thought I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I agree with Hillary and David. It's been ongoing for a long time. There definitely are deficiencies, but I don't know what the answer is. That the two agencies need to work together collaboratively, but the farmers are in the middle, and that's where I'm at, and that's what I'm worried about.
And I just had a quick question. I thought that in some of our conversation around this issue, it's been, it comes up regularly. I think we have recognized that the MOU has failed and is failing the public, the environment, and farmers particularly. They're stuck in the middle. When we talked about this, and we talked about the termination of enforcement, and then that second sentence that really all of their energy should be going to supporting the sector's transition and et cetera, I was thinking about it in the sense of enforcement and compliance. And maybe I'm parsing two things that in practice don't really happen. But for me, compliance is the technical assistance. It's supporting farmers to do everything they can to minimize negative water quality impacts. And when that fails, then enforcement begins. And when the ag agency has been doing compliance, technical assistance, and enforcement is where most of the problems have occurred. And then the interaction between the two agencies seems to have failed with finger pointing both ways, et cetera. And so I'm wondering if we with a little wordsmithing, we might be able to address some of what's been brought up with just one or two words to focus on that, kind of what Jeff was talking about. But I wonder if anyone has a perspective on whether my sense of enforcement and compliance, compliance within Agency of Ag and enforcement at DAC, that's how I was thinking about it. Is that just off base, David?
Yeah, no, I think you're onto something. I think that's how it should have happen. The problem is, it just goes to the dysfunction, and it's calling, going to Carol's point, we need clarity. Everyone needs clarity, and partly what's happening is during the technical assistance, or the perception of DEC enforcement is that if Agency of Ag is involved in talking to the farmer at the same time, that they're telling the farmer two different things. And then they can't actually enforce against the farmer because a state official has told them that what they're doing is okay. I have no personal experience of that. I have no firsthand knowledge of that, but that's what's reported by both agencies in terms of the tension. And it's hard for us as a citizen public group to figure out, how do you get in the middle of two agencies that are that ridiculously in different places? We're paying tax dollars to two agencies that are fighting with each other. So I don't know what the answer is, but the part of the reason we came to this recommendation was there's a clarity to it. All of which is back to Jeff's point. I think Jeff's tweak is a good one, suggesting that there should be nothing about it, DEC taking enforcement that should preclude technical assistance and compliance support from the Agency of Ag. It's just at the end of the day, one agency needs to be on point to make the decision, and they should do it in a way that's consistent, effective, and transparent.
So I wonder that whether in our bolded first statement, we add a line that says until a viable alternative is, it requires legislative approval, right? The MOU is a legislative approval, right? Didn't it get 1993 and has been reapproved? That till it's approved, and then just add in a line about the technical support in the second section. Hillary?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. And I think the other piece here is that at the very end of the last sentence, it talks about the Agency of Ag to be focusing on sustainable alternatives and enhanced RIPs, which makes me think that we're talking about them not being, working with compliance to the actual RIPs. So I think we need to just, if we're talking about them still working on compliance with existing rules, we would need to just take a look at that sentence too. Enhanced RIPs makes me think of like PES programs or something, something along those lines.
Okay, so Eric?
Yeah, just a side note or whatever. If it is a direct discharge, that goes directly to the DEC. So it is complicated for sure.
All right, so I think people have some hard stops. I think what I'd like to do is take this, make a few minor wordsmithing, have Elizabeth be sure it all fits into the spacing and et cetera she's done, share it with you all digitally for final approval, and do that within 24 hours, and hopefully we've reached consensus. I think I heard consensus on the next generation toxic pollution adjustments, and we'll do our best to wordsmith that. And I think I heard consensus on terminate the MOU until a viable alternative is replaced, and adjusting the last sentence that makes clear that technical assistance for compliance should be part of the focus in support of the Agency of Ag. Does that sound correct? Lori?
I'm not sure. I'll have to see it in writing, but I've got to run to another meeting,
Yeah.
so apologies.
Well, I understand. I'd like to have unanimous consent with all of this. So I think the way to reach that is to try to make these three, I think I counted, minor tweaks, and get it back to all of you and have everyone sign off on it. Carol, you have another comment?
I'm fine with it, but I can't remember. I mean, I think people were saying they might have agreed that we should be clear, but I think we should be as absolutely just forceful as what David Mears was saying. DEC is not enforcing promptly with clarity and transparency. You know, there's a breakdown. The MOU isn't working. That's the kind of language that will get my attention. So that's what I have to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so unless there's, you know, a desire to try to wordsmith this now, my recommendation is we make the minor adjustments and try to turn this around within 24 hours, have a consensus digital review, and get it to print and not have any further delay. Does that sound reasonable to everybody?
I like it, Mark. This is Bill.
Okay. Any objections to that? Better ideas? Okay. So I'm going to do that with Katie first thing in the morning, and we'll review the recording and just make sure we've got the wordsmithing or taking folks in their comments into account. And I will try to turn that around in the middle of the day as soon as Elizabeth might be able to just make those tweaks, and I might be able to work with Elizabeth directly and just do it in Adobe, so that we don't add another step in the process. So I'll check in with Elizabeth on her schedule, and we'll go from there. Thanks, everybody. Our next meeting will be April. Let me check our next meeting will be April 12th. We'll put it in the calendar, send out a reminder, and we will be in touch as soon as we hear the first inklings of opportunity for presentation to the legislative committees. So please, everyone that is available, please let Katie and I know your general desire and then availability, and we'll get back to you and try to sort of do our own internal doodle poll on getting people ready, willing, and able. Okay? All right. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it. Take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
And a second. Thanks,
Second.
Eric. Thanks, Jane. You should hear from me tomorrow sometime. Thanks.
Sorry, Mark, for the trouble.
It's all good. Thanks, Hillary.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Bye-bye.